Chigwell School. Aged 11, I won a scholarship to a public school. So did my mate Ken. It was different from state school. We were introduced to a new world. We had to view the notice boards 3 times a day. We soon became comfortable with previously unknown vocabulary like cavey and beak. Not reading a notice was not an excuse for not doing something or not being somewhere if a notice said you should. On the first day, we found our names on the fagging list. Boys in the lower forms had to complete chores such as sweeping up leaves in the bike shed, picking up any litter from the paths, or carrying out tasks for prefects or pro-prefects, such as cleaning their boots or making them toast. Each boy had 3 faggings per term and had to do each one for a week. After completing the task, we had to report to the pro-prefects who would check that the job had been done satisfactorily. Additional fagging, known as labour squad, could be dished out by prefects if a boy was seen not to be following one of the school rules. For example, a boy could be given quadruple labour squad if 1. He had his hands in his pockets, 2. His jacket was unbuttoned, 3. His tie was not secured with a tie pin, and 4. He was not wearing a school cap. I don't believe this was mentioned in the school prospectus. Discipline in the school in the late 50s and early 60s was generally good, but some teachers had better discipline than others. Some teachers gave lines. I remember having to write for the Latin teacher 100 times, "I must always remember never to grin when a master rebukes me." Quite a long line, and a mindless waste of time, but I developed a method of shortening the time, writing with 3 pens simultaneously. But usually misdemeanours were dealt with by some form of corporal punishment. The English teacher would grasp a boy's scalp with one hand, slapping the cheek with the other, then change hands while the boy turned the other cheek. The music teacher would grab the boy's hair and use his head as his baton, conducting the choir. The geography teacher would review our knowledge of meteorology using his hands to demonstrate rainfall on a miscreant's head. Ken and I both suffered during our first year. I threw a blackboard duster at another pupil, and it narrowly missed the French teacher as he came through the doorway. That was worth 2 hard strokes with a thick cane. Ken was caned by a Latin teacher who was somewhat short-sighted. 6 strokes, and the 6th one missed its target, curled round Ken's hand and cut his finger, which bled profusely. We were taught nature study by the art mistress. There were no science labs at the school at that time, the only woman teacher we had. Ken was a very hospitable character and kindly wrote, "Welcome Elizabeth Smith" on the blackboard before she came in. Miss Smith did not appreciate the welcome and organised a beating for Ken by the head boy of the school the following day. With time at his disposal, Ken set about organising a method of minimising the pain. He borrowed football shorts from about 10 boys in the class, and before presenting himself for his punishment, managed to get most of them on and wriggle into his trousers, setting a precedent for the rest of us in the class. Actually, being beaten was not that much of a problem if the punishment was instant, but it was unpleasant to be told, "Come to my office after school on Friday and I'll beat you." The psychological pain was worse than the physical pain. I always got backache before a deferred beating, but after the first stroke, the back pain disappeared. The French and history teacher was a housemaster. The school had a number of boarders, and he would invite transgressors to his room. There was a chest of drawers full of canes of various lengths and sizes. He would have a few practice swings with 3 or 4, then invite the victim to choose which cane he would like to be beaten by. I always chose the shortest one. The local vicar taught scripture part-time. He was rather unworldly and had little idea about teaching or keeping discipline. I can't remember what caused him to launch himself at Ken, but he did, his arms flailing about Ken's head for perhaps a minute. Ken lowered his head and protected himself with his arms. The vicar had a very distinctive voice. He talked a lot about Q, a lost gospel. When our maths teacher was describing a geometric principle and he spoke about point Q on the diagram, I echoed Q, copying the voice of the vicar. The lesson was boring enough for my interjection to cause a ripple of laughter around the class. "Come and see me afterwards," the teacher hissed. I accompanied him to the staff room, bent over the specially designated chair, and received my punishment, 6 strokes with the cane. As I stood up, I noticed bits of cane strewn around the floor, which for some reason made me chuckle. The maths teacher said, "Right, get out," and pushed me through the doorway. I realised he was crying. Apart from the corporal punishment from staff and senior boys, we also had to contend with bullying. In the first year, we shared a changing room with one of the boarding houses, so there were much older boys present on Wednesday and Saturday afternoons when the whole school had games, football or cricket. Each games day, the bigger boys would fill a bath with cold water, pick on a first year, strip him, put him in the bath and submerge his head for a minute or so. We were told that we would all have to experience this at some time in the year, so Wednesday and Saturday afternoons were always anticipated with some trepidation. Also, a senior boy called Reed enjoyed football practice, shooting imaginary goals from one end of the room to the other. The fact that there were 26 boys between himself and the wall he kicked the ball against did not deter him. In fact, the ball hardly ever hit the wall. Music lessons took place in the gym, which had not served as such since one of the pupils had died after falling off some apparatus. This was on the first floor, changing rooms are on the ground floor. Trebles at the back, altos in the middle, basses and tenors at the front. When class was dismissed, the basses and tenors were first to leave, but the altos stayed, forming a barrier to ensure the trebles could not escape. The trebles were first years, the altos second and third. The altos would select a treble, hoist him onto a table at the front of the classroom, and pull his trousers down in order to investigate and interfere with whatever might come to light. This was Tuesday afternoon, last lesson, the least preferred lesson of the week for first years. In the corner of the gym was a massive heating pipe insulated by an asbestos sleeve. I realised that I could escape from the carnage by sliding down the pipe onto the ground floor. Unfortunately, on emerging from the downstairs cupboard, shaking off bits of the asbestos which shielded the pipe, I was met by the music teacher, who performed his non-musical baton charge described above. Sneaking was totally taboo. Anyone who blew the whistle about being bullied would suffer terrible consequences when the truth came out. But Timothy Williams had 2 older brothers in the school. He sneaked. The administration came down hard on the perpetrators, and Williams, flanked by his brothers, survived. But there was no doubt in my mind that the staff had been fully aware of the bullying taking place before it was formally reported to them. I also suspect that it was perceived as a long-running tradition, acting as part of the character-forming ethos of the school. My children went to state comprehensives.